All right, my name is Zac Owens, and I am a writer and editor at Monkeys Fighting Robots. I'm here with Jack Mulqueen. Jack, you are a writer of a brilliant series that I've had the joy of getting to read. It's Nightlife Noir. I feel like there's so much to talk about before we even get into my questions. You not only have written Nightlife Noir, which has a series of different artists that you're working with. You're having issues 3 and 4 coming out on your Kickstarter soon, but you are also a nightlife developer. So you've opened clubs. You most recently opened it's Outer Heaven is the club
That's
you
the
most
one.
recently opened. And you said something about it being connected to a comic book shop as well. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so Outer Heaven opened January 16th of this year.
Mhm.
Um, and the name is inspired by Metal Gear Solid, which is one of
Okay.
my favorite video games. So there's at every aspect of the concept, there's a deep-rooted love for otaku, gaming, manga,
Nice.
nerd culture. There's actually a really like a beautiful continuous, I want to say it's about 30 feet mural
Uh-huh.
from Otomo's Akira,
Oh my
uh,
goodness.
which spans the entire length of the record bar. And a dream of mine was always to um, get into the retail component of the comic space
Yeah.
and do a little bit of curation. And I find that coat checks at bars, clubs, restaurants are, underutilized spaces. So what we did with Outer Heaven was we turned our coat check into a like a retail kiosk where we sell like a seasonally rotating piece of apparel. We
Mhm.
have like a glass display case for some novelty items like sake, like wooden engraved sake boxes,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
slip mats for vinyls,
Uh-huh.
and then 4 shelves on either side of the coat check where we sell mostly trade paperbacks
Cool.
and graphic novels. Although there are single editions of or single issues rather of Nightlife Noir 1 and 2 there, and
That's
soon
awesome.
3 and 4 when we send it to print, and then some vinyl as well.
That's crazy. These are all the kinds of passions that I wouldn't expect to come together. I think Nightlife Noir itself as a series is kind of like a testament of how those things can come together brilliantly. But at face value, you see them and you're like, what in the world is going on? Nightclub owner and comic book nerd. I love it. I love to see it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
for me, the writing aspect really started during the pandemic when I
mhm.
was forced to close all of my businesses.
Yeah.
And I developed such a love for it that, obviously I've continued it since then.
Mhm.
But when I decided to open these 2 new projects, I wanted to figure out a way to weave my passions into it.
Yeah.
And I also like, I guess the romantic in me noticed that a lot of that, when my customers are meeting throughout the week, usually they're either some of the party are early or some of the party are late. And I
Mhm.
had this idyllic vision that that the inner sanctum, which is the
Mhm.
name of the comic
The
shop in the
comic book
front,
shop. Yeah.
that people could kind of come there and browse, maybe pick up a book, and just kind of flip through it while they're waiting for the
Have a
rest of their
place to
party to arrive.
chill out and actually
Maybe it
look at
becomes
something. Yeah, that's
maybe it
really
becomes
cool.
a talking point as well. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And then Nightlife Noir 1 and 2 received the Projects We Love commendation from Kickstarter, and you were also featured in Panel by Panel, which is amazing. I love that.
that was very exciting. That was a submission.
Uh-huh.
Um, I don't recall how the conversation came about, but uh, I reached out to Hassan Otsman El who
Hmm.
is one of the editors
Yeah,
of Panel by Panel,
and he also
and
does Panel Naked, which I have to say
Strip
is like
Panel
the
Naked.
best YouTube channel
To
out
me,
there.
Strip Panel Naked, I think, was really the formative education
Hmm.
that I taught myself essentially on what is going into like the craft and the formalist aspects of comics. I was in Vermont for much of the pandemic,
Mhm.
and I just remember sitting and watching, as much as I could before I went to sleep, taking notes. I mean, he really is an academic when it comes
Really, yeah.
uh,
And he
to
has an
comic.
incredible eye for just the details and how they tell the story. I would say like same for me. My criticism all came from like learning how to be a like comic book critic and all that jazz. That all came from Haas's channel because he just shows you how to like pick out the story elements out of the details. It's incredible.
And I well, I was honored that he considered me for the book, but it actually wound up striking up a relationship, and
And
we've
he's
actually working together now on
yeah,
a couple of books. We have issue 4 of Nightlife Noir,
I
which
saw
he
that he was in the credits there as letterer, and I was nerding out over it. That's so cool.
and something that we haven't announced yet that's coming soon. That's a little bit more of a long form project.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so this is kind of talking about nightlife noir in general, but you also have Prodigious Digits, which is where you're selling nightlife noir from. Are you hoping for that to be a bigger brand where you're having a lot of comics coming out through
Yeah,
Prodigious
well,
Digits?
I guess as a as an entrepreneur, I know the value of corporate structure,
Mhm.
forming an entity. So Prodigious Digits was really just kind of create a shell company so that my accountant wouldn't kill me at the end of every year for this new stream of kind of revenues and expenses that I was creating. Complicating things for her, but then
Mhm.
also to consolidate all of my intellectual property, and so really, like, right now it's just kind of like a vessel by which, like, I kind of operate my comics business. But who knows, one day maybe I'll have aspirations to kind of grow that into a greater umbrella. And for me, the most exciting part about making comics has always been the collaborative process that
Yeah.
comes with it, finding incredibly talented and creative people who share your vision, but also mitigate my Achilles heel as an artist. I'm
Mhm.
not an artist.
Yeah.
I
And
can,
you have
from time to time sketch some composition stuff when
yeah.
there's something particularly abstract that I'm looking to have interpreted on the page, but for the most part, I leave that to the pros.
And you
Um,
even have examples of that in Nightlife Noir 1 and 2. You have like essay forums at the end, which I'm also going to talk about later. But you have incredible artists working with you. They bring such an interesting flavor to everything that you're doing, and they're so different. All your scripts for each story are also so different, but the style of the art is incredibly different in such cool ways.
Yeah, for me, I think I don't remember who said it, but someone told me once that, when you're first starting out, that, doing something short story, more analog, um, anthology oriented might be a
Mhm.
better way to kind of learn, because every artist has such a different process in terms of how they communicate, how they turn in work, your feedback, revisions if necessary. Revisions always in service of the story. However,
Yeah,
that's one thing I've
yeah,
um, and so it was really an education.
yeah.
I had to put on my editor hat sometimes,
Mhm.
and understood the importance of deadlines,
Yeah,
setting them, adhering
yeah,
to them.
yeah,
So it's kind of like a crash course in the comic science.
yeah,
But then with these two new books, I wanted to pursue something that was a little bit more long form.
yeah.
So both, issues 3 and issues 4 tell self-contained kind of one-shot
Mhm.
style stories. One of them is 24 pages in length. One of them, I believe, is 36 pages in length. So gradually starting to kind of expand the breadth of the stories. And I thought that gave, the longer form, I think, gave the artists a lot of, and the script as well, a lot of freedom in terms of letting certain moments breathe,
Yeah,
incorporating more splash pages, double splash pages, and
yeah,
that's the juicy stuff that everybody
yeah. No
wants to
kidding.
see. So mhm.
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of it feels like 3 and 4 take a transition in a lot of different ways. I'll get to more of that in some of my questions later, but it's really exciting to see that it's not just a series that has like plateaued and does its own thing in a very similar way all the way through. It's constantly evolving, and you can see that both in your writing, in the art, and in the just way that you're telling the story. It's constantly evolving. I also wanted to say Prodigious Digits as a name is so annoying because it's one of those things that I'm like, damn it, I wish I'd thought of that. Can you leave like a couple good ideas for the rest of us? Okay, Jack? Because
Well, my friends laugh all the time when I tell them, when they say the name to me and whatnot, but um, really the derivation of the name, beside it being alliterative,
Mhm.
is well, if you think about it, like our fingers, right? Our digits are what make this drive this industry, both in
Yeah.
terms of people's skill with their hands,
Mhm.
in terms of the artists,
Yeah.
and how delicately they kind of drag the ink across the page,
Mhm.
but then also in terms of the writers who stand in front of the typewriter dutifully,
Yeah.
punching away at the keys. So it really is our digits that kind of are the driving force of the industry, both on the writing side and the artist side. So that's kind of where the name came from.
Which leads me to a very important follow-up question. Do you use a typewriter for your scripts?
Well, I have a mechanical keyboard. It's
Okay, okay.
ergonomic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna
So
say, my goodness, that would be amazing. And but at the same time, having read some of your stuff, not surprising in the least bit. I feel like you would totally be old school like that.
I used to print all of my scripts and kind of mark them up with red ink, but I was
Mhm.
being very inconsiderate to the trees. So actually recently, um, I got an iPad and
Oh yeah.
one of those magic pens,
Hmm.
and I've just been marking them up in Adobe, which is a little bit more conscious. And I've actually been with colorists, like with
Hmm.
any revisions that I have to colorists, any continuity things or little
Hmm.
details that they might have missed, I'll just mark that up in Adobe too and send that over as a PDF, and that's really been assisting with the process. I had a colorist recently reach out and was like, "Hey, I wish more writers did that." So
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And so you're anything but old school when it comes to comes to this stuff. Uh, okay, so real quick before we get into the questions, I know I keep saying that, but I did want to just go through all the stories that you have in issues 1, 2, 3, and 4, and just kind of credit everyone for it. So issues 1 and 2, you had letterer Manny Medeiros on both of those issues for all of the stories. Each issue had 3 stories in it. Issue 1 had
Manny also did the designs of the book as well, just
okay, okay, yeah.
quickly, and he also did the dressing. He prepared issues 3 and 4 for print. So
Oh, amazing.
he's had his hand in all 4
Yeah,
projects.
no kidding. He's man of many hats.
Mhm.
So the first story in issue 1 is Remoras. That's with artist Raymond Estrada. Then you have Sunday Mofongo, which I'm sure I'm butchering, but Abile Kusinov is the artist with colorist Alex Battle, and then Life of the Party with Alfredo Torres on the art. And then issue 2 is El Disco Erotique with artist Andre Guerin, Queen of the Castle with artist Dylan Snook, and A Brief Moment of Ecstasy with artist Mark Garetta and colorist Alex Battle. Again. And then in issue 3, so this is your first longer form one, is Promo 5000 with artist Laura Helsby, colorist Fabi Marquez.
Fabi Marquez.
Fabi
Mhm.
Marquez, okay.
Mhm.
And then letterer Jeff Powell. And
Mhm.
then issue 4 is Jungle of the Damned with artists Dylan Snook and Paul Azacata. Also did some, I'm sure, am I saying that right? Azacata?
As I said,
I sound so white when I'm trying to say these names. And then you have colorist Nicola Bergdorf and letterer Hassan Otsmani El Hal. So my first question is: you've worked in the nightclub industry yourself, as we've established. You've just opened your new club, Outer Heaven. You've said that a lot of these stories are inspired by your experiences and the people that you run into in some of your essays. But Nightlife Noir almost takes on a horror quality. at times, it can be like quite disturbing and twisted even. So what do you think of the nightclub industry? Because it's
Oh, well, it's
obviously,
horrific.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's
It's
obviously something that you work in and you're continuing to work in. So I would expect, have some love for it, but at the same time, you have these. They're almost like cautionary tales of the nightclub industry as well.
Yeah, well, I see myself as kind of like a civic servant fulfilling a very integral need
Hmm.
um, for the city at
Yeah.
large. And, um, because I think that people work so hard during the week to, especially like where I live in New York City,
Hmm.
and it's very taxing living
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
uh, in terms of just the amount of energy um, that the city draws from you, and the amount of city that energy that you draw from the city.
Yeah.
And then that charge, that energy charge,
Mhm.
people kind of carry it into the weekend, and it's almost like an exhaust valve that they're turning, right? And so my establishments are places where people come to let off that steam.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of, because we have kind of like a doorman policy where we pick and choose who we want from who arrives, especially late night when we're in more
Yeah.
nightclub mode, because the businesses are open at 6 o'clock, is more like a cocktail bar where everyone's welcome.
Yeah.
But really, we're in our limited interaction with prospective patrons, we're trying to intuit, are they going to be additive to the energy of the room, or are they coming there to derive utility from the space without replenishing the well,
Yeah.
so to speak? And it's very long hours.
Mhm.
I come home nowadays. I come home at 5 in the morning on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. I
Wow.
work 6 days a week, as well,
Wow.
doing administrative stuff.
My
So ever
goodness.
since I opened Outer Heaven, the time to write, because that requires such a different type of thinking,
Uh-huh.
has been few and far between, and really just like a necessary reprieve when I have a moment where I can kind of sink into that.
You just
But
have like a coffee IV with you at all times, just
yeah,
pumping
got like
espresso into
some
your
kind of
veins.
like but really, Nightlife Noir, I think you might have touched on it. They're more like cautionary tales.
Mhm.
I had the good fortune during the nascent stages of my career of failing upwards.
Yes.
So my first two projects were total disasters.
Mhm.
I had no idea what I was doing. One of them, I got bamboozled by a partner who was very disingenuous,
Mhm.
and lost almost like a year of income.
Wow.
But essentially, we had the community
Mhm.
that myself and my other partner had established there, that we carried over into our next venue,
Mhm.
which was a tremendous commercial success. And I actually, after a 5 year tenure over there, I just recently sold off my shares to my partner, and opened up these two new projects, Outer Heaven
Mhm.
and Laissez-Faire, which is opening in about 4 weeks in the
Oh my
cellar of
gosh.
the
So you're
hotel.
busy at the moment working on things.
Yeah. But throughout that 10-year journey,
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of people get kind of chewed up and spit out. I've seen
Yeah.
people lose the money of themselves and everyone that they love, and get run out of town. I've
Ooh.
seen customers fall victim to other customers who didn't have necessarily the best intentions for them.
Mhm.
I've seen staff who have kind of just not been able to keep up with the physical demands and rigor
Mhm.
of their respective positions. And so
And that's often the perspective that your stories take. Not all the time, but a lot of the time it's the staff of nightclubs who are
yeah.
just going through the day-to-day of working at it, and it's wearing on them.
And then especially, I think a prevailing through line of a lot of these stories
Mhm.
is that, it is an industry that is driven by incredibly high net worth individuals.
Yeah.
uh, and that, you know, and this is a broad generalization, but a lot of times the higher your net worth, the more disaffected by humanity you are,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of the protagonists, if you would call them that, are people who kind of get caught up in the orbit of these high net worth individuals.
Which
And
is amazing because that's your first story. In your first story, it's almost like a thesis statement of where this series is going to go, because it's called Remoras, and it's about the idea of whales, who are these very wealthy characters who kind of everyone orbits around them, and everyone's a remora, and you talk about that, and then those
kind of
themes
like a
come.
Lacheron.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I've seen a lot of stories about the whales, but I haven't seen that many stories about the remoras.
Yeah.
And from a whale standpoint, you know, and from to the untrained eye, you might see it as a parasitic relationship, right? Where the remora is really deriving more utility from the whale. But in actuality, when the more you come in contact with a lot of these whales, they're like incredibly lonely and
Yeah.
solitary individuals, and
Yeah.
so there's a reciprocity there
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
that I find very fascinating. And
Mm.
for me, I'm the third party, right? Like I'm
Yeah,
the
you're
omniscient
watching this
narrator.
kind of unfold in front of you.
Mhm.
Um, so these stories are very much part of an anthology. A lot of them echo each other. We kind of just talked about this, the same themes in different stories. But some of the stories are actually shockingly different. Your range of storytelling is incredible. Like right
Thank you.
off the bat, you start out with Remoras. That's and it's incredibly poetic in your diction. It's very verbose in a really beautiful way. But then you transition into, I think the next one is Sunday Mofongo, which is just a very dialed down conversation between, or almost like a monologue with this son and his mother trying to tell her. Um, so sorry, where was I going with this? um, what made you want to approach the series as shorts at first? You've talked about this a little bit, and what led to the change in issues 3 and 4?
Yeah, well, it was really a crash course in the art of making comics, I guess. And also, you know, as an unproven creator with zero credits under my belt, I didn't want to, you know, sign on any artist to any kind of long-term obligation where they would have uncertainty about the project. So I think from a
Yeah,
commitment standpoint, 6 to 8 pages was adequate.
yeah,
Um, I also was reading a lot of Anton Chekhov at the
mhm,
time, and his short stories, which are absolutely brilliant.
yeah,
And then I thought that, um, you know, I thought that it was important in terms of, you know, trying to, you know, hopefully one day attract some publisher interest to show like a range of subject matter,
mhm,
storytelling styles, narrative decisions that would kind of paint a little bit more of a comprehensive picture
yeah,
of, you know, my interests as a writer. So,
yeah. Cool.
and
I
then
think,
for 3 and 4,
yeah,
it was a desire to you know, let the story breathe, so tell
yeah,
something that's like a little bit longer in form. Obviously that allows you to kind of construct the page differently in terms of panel density,
mhm,
and do some very interesting things on the page as well, from a formatting standpoint.
yeah. And I think it has done, at least from my reading of it, exactly what you were talking about. You kind of used issues 1 and 2 as a proving ground, almost, for, yeah, this is a series, this is what it's going to look like, and here are all these different perspectives of it in a short amount of time. And I think just being able to showcase your range from the ridiculous to the really down to earth and very vulnerable stories that you have there. It's really incredible. In the first 2 issues, also sorry if I'm looking off to the right a bit here. I'm just going through my questions. But in the first 2 issues, you also included your thoughts on each story in like an essay form. In one of them, you mentioned that an editor friend, when hearing your idea of doing these like 3 stories at a time, said that it sounds like a haiku. Um, what is it that connects poetry and comics, do you think?
Well, I think rhythm
Yeah.
is a big component of it in terms of how, comics are a very demanding
Mhm.
medium in terms of reader participation,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, prose is as well because you're asking the reader to convert words into and visualize them in their head. But in comics, you're asking people to fill in the gap, right? As
Yeah.
is it Scott McCloud would
I think
say?
so. Talking about
In
what happens in the gutter, right?
exactly what
Pages.
happens in between panel A and panel B.
Yeah.
That's the movement. That's the dynamism
Yeah.
of comics, and that's the most appealing aspect of a reader is imagining what that movement feels like. And
Yeah.
so, a great way of kind of visualizing that is the eye line,
Mhm.
in terms of how the reader's eye tracks through the page. And I
Mhm.
think that there needs to be a jauntiness to it,
Mhm.
and you
Yeah.
achieve that by having control over panel density,
Mhm.
word count, SFX in terms of the Grawlixes, or not
Yeah.
Grawlixes, what are they called? The onomatopoeias.
Yeah.
And how does the reader kind of flow through the page? Do you want to halt them? Like, do you want
Yeah.
to arrest them with a block of text?
Yeah.
Do you want to do a page with no text that they can kind
Mhm.
of flow through?
Yeah.
It's, I've been DJing for about 15 years now, and
Mhm.
it's not unlike controlling the beats per minute, the pitch of a
Yeah.
record. You can pitch it down and allow people to kind of gather themselves, or you can crank it up and kind of drive them towards some kind of ecstatic release. And I
Yeah.
think the comics, the pacing of it is very similar, and I guess that would be, I guess, the closest parallel that I would have towards poetry in terms of its
Yeah.
form.
Yeah. And you actually play with that idea of connecting it with DJing as well in your short story in the second issue, El Disco Erotique. Um,
Mhm.
Such an interesting connection there. And I think that's kind of what's cool about your perspective of being someone who works in nightclubs. And not that that's one of those jobs where you go like, oh, he's doing comics. That's weird. Those things are mutually exclusive, but just something I haven't heard before of somebody, starting out in clubs and then starting with writing comics after that. And it's
And
just
I wanted to also like shatter certain preconceived notions about, like, the DJing one, for example.
yeah.
I do all of the music programming at my clubs, and we get a lot of solicitations in terms of young DJs who are looking for gig, for example.
Uh-huh.
And I've noticed, just like with like incredible frequency over the last 15 years, everyone is a DJ now. And
Yeah.
I think that that's because the software is so advanced that it's very easy to pick up. I
Mhm.
think that but I often find that people are drawn to it because of the allure of, being on center stage and expressing yourself musically, controlling an audience.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they forget that, you're the last one there when the lights are turned on.
Yep.
And in that respect, I guess that particular story is really about what happens when all of the guests leave.
Yeah.
And, for these DJs who play at small rooms, small clubs,
Mhm.
it's kind of like it's you're there when the lights are turned on. You have to be there, and so even if you make a friendship or a potential romantic prospect, like, it's very difficult to kind of convert that feeling of spontaneity, because you're kind of shackled to that booth
Yeah.
until the place is closed.
And
So
it's interesting because you show both sides in that story. You show both sides of the coin. You show the kind of like just having to go through the motions and do the job. And then you also show that like rapturous experience in the middle of why this guy is a DJ. Um, so as you've said, you take inspiration from your work for these stories. Have you ever had someone who's been an inspiration for one of the characters be any part of the process of telling the story?
I think that the story, like from a story standpoint, uh I am at a place where I like to maintain kind of autonomy of the story, like
Yeah.
in a very holistic sense.
Mhm.
And so I have had people ever since I released the first books come up to me and be like, "Hey, like you should do this. Like you should do a
Yeah,
story about
yeah.
this." But and sometimes, like for example, with some of my I guess like super premium Kickstarter rewards, I figured out ways to kind of incorporate the likenesses of certain friends into subsequent issues
Yes.
in 3 and 4. Even offer someone the option to be, killed off in a subsequent issue, which
I want to talk about
um
that real quick if I can stop you there, because that
yeah.
I was looking through the different rewards that you have for your Kickstarter, and that is just incredible. So you have the in the scene package that people can get for $290, and they're actually, you have someone you love or someone you hate or yourself actually drawn into the background of a scene, right?
hmm
And then you
Yeah, and,
have,
and I've actually a couple of people got more than they bargained for because they became pretty pivotal characters in issues 3 and 4, although
okay,
I
okay,
won't
that's
tell you
really
which
cool.
ones.
Yeah, yeah. And then Only the Good Die Young. This one I love so much. It's for $560. But basically, if somebody buys that package, they can not only be drawn in, but they get brutally murdered in a future Prodigious Digits project.
And it
That,
was very interesting to see who someone purchased it for the first Kickstarter,
yeah,
and in issue 3 of Nightlife Noir,
which has a
their
lot of brutal
their
murders.
victim, yeah, their victim came to their untimely demise. Let's just say that it's a doorman in New York
Uh-huh.
City who is
Uh-huh.
notoriously stringent,
Uh-huh.
and but any likeness is purely coincidental,
Of
right?
course it is. Of course it is. For legal
And
reasons, right?
yeah, and so that one was purchased so quickly for the first one that I expanded it to 3 because I noticed that the body count of this series had been kind of rising. So why
Mhm.
not take advantage of that? And
Yeah.
um, although 2 of them have been acquired so far, but one of them was purchased by my brother-in-law, with whom I share like a very competitive relationship in terms of sports and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit nervous now who he's going to elect to kill because
That's
we'll
amazing.
see.
Um, has anyone ever recognized themselves in one of your stories?
Anytime
As
I
in,
use someone's likeness, generally speaking, I'll
reach out to
during
them?
kind of character concepting phase, I'll send them over some concept art and get them excited about the books.
Oh,
So for
cool.
sure.
How about as an inspiration for who the character is more so than how they look?
There was one particular analog in issue 2
Hmm.
in the story, A Brief Moment of Ecstasy,
Yeah,
which
great
was
story.
probably like one of the few, with the exception of the third act, or I guess you could say the big twist at the end, that was very much grounded in reality. It was an
Hmm.
experience that one of my bartenders had, who was a longtime friend of mine as well, and basically and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling the story, but he was a financial aid student at a
Hmm.
very prestigious Upper East Side academy.
Yeah.
I believe that it was the school that Patrick Bateman went to in American Psycho.
Oh,
So
wow.
like that should be the kind of the
That gives a
average
great
Joe of
idea.
student
Yeah.
there. But then later in life, we reconnected, and he's a stand-up comedian, and he was looking for a bartender gig on the side,
Hmm.
and was bartending for a lot of former high school classmates of his, many of whom had kind of like forgotten about him,
Hmm.
and had kind of stayed the same person that they were in high school, very shielded, very rude.
Yeah.
And I could tell that the evolution of the relationship from a classmate to someone who not only later in life doesn't acknowledge you as a peer, but is also kind of like really kind of diminishing you in terms of the client and
Someone who's a dick,
service
you know?
relationship,
Yeah.
was really weighing heavily on him.
Yeah.
And one night in particular, he really snapped.
Yeah.
He had too many adverse interactions with customers, and I really wanted to kind of tap into that. So that was something that was very sensitive to me.
Yeah.
So he was very involved throughout the kind of creative process, and gave his consent, gave his blessings, and obviously he was able to kind of mete out some poetic justice at the end. So I
Yeah.
think that he was happy with that.
Yeah.
But
That's
we're all about it. Prodigious Digits is kind of fulfilling different fantasies.
yeah,
So
the cathartic experience of it.
mhm.
So all of your stories from issues 1 to 3 either take place, correct me if I'm wrong, they either take place in Mega Club or in Club Babylon.
Mhm.
I took a look through the club names that you have of the places you have started, just to be sure. But I didn't see these names come up. What brought you to these names?
Yeah, so Babylon was Babylon, all the stories that take place in issues 1 and 2 are kind of inspired by the Black Lodge, which
Yeah,
was my first proper nightclub venture
which I'm
that opened
assuming
up.
is a Twin Peaks
Mhm,
reference, right? Okay,
mhm.
cool.
That one opened up in Nolita, which is like
Hmm.
a little neighborhood in Soho, in November of 2015.
Hmm.
And that one was really like a flash in the pan because of some circumstances that led to its just like immediate demise at the height of its prowess. So
Uh-huh.
it really achieved this kind of mythical status in people's mind, because generally like there's kind of this atrophy process that happens with a lot of nightclubs,
Hmm.
where they lose relevance and they lose their customer base as new places start to open. They lose their luster, right?
Hmm.
And this one, much like, well, I don't want to draw analogies between Studio 54, but something very similar happened there, where Studio 54 was only open for 2 years before they like immediately closed overnight.
Yeah.
And so, something similar happened with us, where we literally had to come in and essentially just remove anything of value from the place because of some shady behavior that was going on with the person who leased the space to us.
Hmm.
Um, and and so that was kind of I guess we talked about catharsis earlier. That like those two issues were very much me kind of eulogizing
Yeah.
the Black Lodge. In issue 3, and issues 3 and 4, you might notice like a tonal shift where the subject matter becomes like a little bit more absurd.
I was that's
And
actually one of my later questions. It almost feels a little bit more heightened in general.
and and for me, like that was kind of me as an author, kind of branching out in terms of the type of genre that I wanted to explore. But then also with number 3 in particular being like very sci-fi oriented. It's like
Yes.
nightclub sci-fi.
Yeah.
But in
And
particular, like,
referential of other things in amazing ways, which I won't go into, but I loved it.
there's been some like a dark humor
Yeah.
element that kind of like pervades all 4 issues.
Hmm.
And I find that humor in particular, like I love parody.
Yeah.
And in particular, like in nightlife, being on the business side of it, there's a lot of characters who I consider kind of like low-hanging fruit, in terms
Yeah.
of like there's such caricatures of themselves. They're so hyperbolic. There's certain aspects of the industry
Yeah.
that are very trend oriented, that I wanted to really like make fun of. Um,
Yeah.
and or that I find like particularly reprehensible, like promoter culture
Yeah.
being one of them. And that's kind of like the focal point of
Of issue 3.
3, because promoters, it's essentially human trafficking, right?
Yeah.
Like in its benign sense, and sometimes like and sometimes not so benign, right? In
Yeah.
terms of model apartments, but we can get to that. That's like a whole nother story for a different day, in terms of like how young and impressionable girls come to New York with aspirations of being models and get kind of like sucked up into the orbit of these promoters. But
Horrible.
yeah, they're terrible human beings,
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to kind of make fun of that, and then also, once again, the transactional relationship of whales, right?
Hmm.
These like lonely and affluent, predominantly male
Hmm.
figures that kind of orbit on the periphery of the scene, and the promoters, and the
Yeah.
value that the promoters add to their lives,
And
and then
and
also
you
the inefficiencies that
yeah,
that
you
relationship.
you present a really interesting whale in issue number 3. Like it's not the kind of whale that you present throughout the rest of the series. I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but I love that you take the same character archetypes, or at least character drives or motivations and stuff like that, and you create very different characters with those basic building blocks staying the same.
And we've seen in the time that issue 3 and issue 1 were written, like there's a new breed of whale that it's kind of
Yeah.
emerged, which is this like cryptocurrency tech startup venture capital guy
Yeah.
who's basically around and has just like come into an extraordinary amount of wealth, and all of a sudden and is incredibly young and no longer knows what to do with it, or you know, sometimes these people are, you know, a little bit on the awkward side, and stuff like that, and then their personality changes when you know, when they're successful. And so you know, that's kind of like the new species of whale that we're touching on in issue 3. And then in issue 4, the subject matter is very oriented on kind of like send up of like this Illuminati shamanic house Burning Man type of culture, but you know, pseudo spiritualistic, you know, wannabe bohemian, you know, global traveling degenerates. And so I thought that was kind of like something that I wanted to explore in comic form. And well, issue 4 in particular, like I thought like we really got into the weeds with it, and tonally feels very similar to issues 1 and 2, but delves into surrealism a little bit.
There's even an aspect to it where it leans into the kind of story tropes and stuff in a way that's like embracing it. Like you start out with the character being found by people, and they're like, "What happened to you?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I'll tell you my story if you have time." And like all good stories starts with a woman, you know. And it's just one of those fantastic ways of like embracing kind of the stereotypes of stories in a way that makes it a little bit more absurd, but kind of like signals you as you're going into the story, this is going to be a bit different than the ones that have come before.
Two things that I once gleaned from a writing workshop with Ram V is you can get a lot of mileage by setting a story in a very exotic locale, exotic world. It doesn't have to be like a physical locale. It can be an exotic setting, sandbox, you know, for the characters to kind of play in. And then also to remember that comics at its core is a visual medium, right? And so whenever you're conceiving a story, like you want to think of like, what are those 3-4 visual hook points in terms of strong imagery that you're going to kind of explore during the story. And I think that one in particular, and issue 3 with some of the splash pages, really kind of get into it in terms of like creating a story with incredibly strong visuals, and then that allows the tropes to kind of function without feeling derivative, because you're presenting them in this fresh context. You're leaning into them, and in that respect it becomes almost a metafiction of
exactly. So I know we've talked about Club Babylon, Mega Club. Is there a significance to the symbol on the door of Club Babylon? So there's a symbol that's like a key with an eye over it.
So that was the logo of the Black Lodge. So that was kind of, and then Babylon was the working title of the nightclub that became Laissez-Faire. For the longest time, we wanted to call it the Babylon Club, which was actually a reference to the movie Scarface. That's the nightclub that he gets shot up in Scarface. Although we found out that there was like a hookah bar on 30, like in the 30s, called Babylon, and one of my partners, who's kind of like the trademark wizard, had concerns about getting the trademark approved, so we went for Laissez-Faire instead.
Is there any significance of the tie of Babylon to like the Bible? Because it's got a lot of biblical significance as a city?
Well, Babylon, the club, when we wanted to name it that, like we wanted to kind of tap into the idea of like a utopian ancient society
Yeah,
of the past. There were I was kind of forming like this creative language that would appear in menus and in our social media that pertain to rituals, like the rituals of invigoration, Dionysian rituals, since it is nightlife, right? Like
yeah,
all of our hours operation occur under periods of the moon.
yeah.
And so, and in particular, since we're always very cognizant of making sure that our rooms are predominantly charged with like a very feminine energy, because I find that kind of placates people, whereas like if you have too many guys in the room, like there's an adrenaline, a testosterone that can kind of like ruin people's enjoyment.
Yeah, and
That
quickly turn into like an aggression or something like
Mhm,
that,
mhm.
which you also showcased in that cops and robbers sequence in
Absolutely.
yeah,
I thought that
Enigmatic
actually I
ecstasy.
mentioned in the back matter of that story, but the
Yeah,
artist Mark Garetta used to be a bartender, and I thought
yeah,
that it was so visceral the way that he rendered all of the customers. And I try to spend very little time behind my bar. I only go when I want to pour myself a drink or something that's very easy to make for a friend. But anytime I step back there, I start getting anxiety because like it's
yeah.
such a grueling and demanding job, and
I bet.
how soon like keeping people waiting,
Mhm.
managing their expectations while serving all the customers, the speed with which all of our bartenders do, because they're very high volume businesses. It's like a
Yeah.
marvel to watch.
And you said you felt that Margareta was almost working through past trauma with the way that he was putting together that scene, and you can see
Definitely.
it. You can see the frustration, anxiety, but also the catharsis of that
Those
piece.
panels don't have a central point of focus, right? Like
Yeah,
everything is kind of rendered
yeah.
it's a wide panel.
It's
So
chaotic.
so it's very much like even your eye when you're trying to
You
track
don't
all
know
the
where to look.
movement on faces.
Yeah. Um, the other thing I noticed, so because these stories take place in the same clubs a lot of the time, can we expect any more characters as the series goes forward to kind of overlap? I noticed that there was like the bartender at Queen of the Castle was also in a brief moment of ecstasy. She showed up briefly. Are there characters I haven't noticed yet that have been in multiple stories, or can we expect to see more?
Yeah, so that was the character. That character was based on a former bartender of ours, Kira, who had a very distinct look
Mhm.
and some extracurricular behaviors too that kind of inform that particular story.
Mhm.
And um, so that was almost like an Easter egg for
Mhm.
all of the Black Lodge patrons who picked up the book. Um, because she was such a visually distinct and recognizable character. I
Mhm.
don't think that there will be any overlaps in Nightlife Noir, because I think that it's very important to kind of I do like when that the stories kind of like can stand on their own two legs, especially for something like this newest Kickstarter.
Yeah.
We are offering issues 1 and 2 as kind of like a as like an add-on, like a supplement to
Mhm.
purchasing the physical copies of issues 3 and 4. But I also don't want to deter people from like who are jumping on at 3 and 4
Yeah, because
because
they're
they have
totally
1 and 2.
self-contained. You don't need
Yes.
to have read anything else before starting with 3 and 4.
However, I do have a dream of one day writing a series that's based on Outer Heaven,
Yeah,
and kind of uses Outer Heaven as a pivotal location, and almost like MacGuffin.
yeah,
I've been able to figure out a way to kind of work that in as kind of like a where the club itself becomes a MacGuffin for the story.
interesting.
And that was really born out of, I'm a huge Doctor Strange fan,
Mhm.
and I always lamented that whenever you go to 177A Bleecker Street, that it's like an Asian massage parlor, essentially.
Or at
That
least
like
to our
occupies a
human
space.
eyes, that's how it
Mhm.
appears, right?
Right. And so I thought that it would be really cool to kind of create a story that where the club itself is something that people could then go and visit, and with the consent of
Yeah.
some of our staff. And I feel really good about this because we have like a really great staff retention rate.
Uh-huh.
Um, at all of our respective venues, and maybe even use their likeness and kind
Yeah,
of weave them as background characters. So
that would be amazing. To this day, I'm still like, why isn't there a Hall of Justice set up somewhere? That'd be really cool. My
totally.
nerdiness is showing.
Or if you play the new Spider-Man video game and you can see all the landmarks like Avengers Tower and the
Yeah,
Wakandan Embassy, and
yeah,
I know where that is supposed to be in the city, but when I go there, I can't see these places. And well, how cool would it be to kind of actually be able to visit that, and it even bear likeness, so you could sit in the
yeah,
same seat where one of your favorite characters sat, and that
yeah. And
a
and
unique position to be.
operating and being exactly what it says in the source material that it is, right?
Totally.
Which
Hopefully
I
the club.
guess the club would be the source material, so it's
That's
good
the
for
only
them.
drawback, is like every kind of like during every pivotal story arc, the be it the Fortress of Solitude or the Sanctum Sanctorum, they always get destroyed at some point. So I guess that's the
Yeah,
one that I have to watch out for, is yeah,
yeah,
when that happens in Act Two.
that's cool. Um, so issue number 4, interestingly enough, is the only issue that doesn't take place in an actual nightclub. There is like a party scene in Tullum. Uh,
Tulum?
is there a significance to this change, or did you just kind of feel like you were telling a story that was happening somewhere else?
Well, the thing about nightlife is it occurs in all shapes and forms.
Yeah.
And there is what you call, or what I guess I've heard people call this the circuit, right? Which is essentially it's almost like a migrant pattern
Mhm.
of these incredibly wealthy, um, morally depraved individuals who just are chasing the dragon perennially all year round. And so they'll go to Burning Man, which takes place in September, and then they're in New York. Then they go to Art Basel, which happens at the beginning of December. Then they're in Tulum for New Year's. Then they, go to Ibiza in May and Mykonos in August, and then somewhere along the way, maybe in Q1, they wind up in Phuket in
Yeah.
Thailand or something like that, and they just go, and they have this cadre of traveling hanger-ons and remoras that kind of
Yeah.
fill the room essentially with bodies,
Yeah.
um, and it's just nonstop.
Yeah.
And
So you felt
interesting.
that idea, that flavor of nightlife was something that you wanted
Well,
to talk about as well.
I think that there's like this like culture vulture
Yeah.
component to it, which
Yeah.
is that, you know, I'm a historian. Like
Yeah.
I always want to get down to the roots of, DJ culture,
Yeah.
nightlife culture in New York, 1970s, the bathhouses. Like, when did the first DJ start mixing records? Like, that's like a novel phenomenon that happened 50 years ago.
Yeah.
The loft, like the counterculture movements that were happening concurrently, house music and techno, which kind of originated from breaks. So it was, predominantly Black DJs who were playing this type of music for, an underprivileged class of people. And the reason that it was so attractive was because rather than going to a bar where you have to order a drink, you could buy a tab of acid for $5. You could buy a ticket for $5, and you could have a whole night for $10, which was like a great way for, kids in Detroit in the late 80s, early 90s to kind of participate in this movement. And then somewhere along the way, when the EDM bubble burst, which I think happened around like 2014 and 15, with the exception of Las Vegas, which has somehow like preserved this culture, which feels kind of archaic anywhere else in the world. Like
Yeah.
the people who are trying to get their rocks off, and it was really, based around partying, wealth, displays of opulence, preying on females,
It's
like
almost like Roman,
all of these,
like
yeah, all of these
yeah.
like hedonistic and depraved aspects which threaten the sanctity of the culture.
Mhm.
Those are the things that I really want to kind of like lampoon
Yeah.
in these texts.
Yeah.
And um and it's almost like a very Shermanistic scorched earth campaign where wherever these people go, they just like leave like destruction in their path.
Yeah.
And Tulum, which was once this very bohemian, beautiful, unknown beach town, has like become like this epicenter of the like these people who just like aren't I don't feel like are participating in the culture for the right reasons.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and
Okay.
what's happened then because of how much the influx of money, then the narcos have come back, and there's three rival narco gangs who now compete over Tulum, and over the drug trade there, because and the tourism there, which are very synonymous with one another. So there's been a lot of violence
Yeah.
that's arisen there recently. And just have the feeling that over the next 5 years, all those people are going to migrate down to Costa Rica, and that's going
Yeah.
to be the next place that they kind of just go and pollute. And that's the funny thing. But Tulum in particular, I've never been there, so like, which I think is very important to the story to say that I've never
Yeah.
been there, because my interpretation of it is strictly from Instagram, which I think is like
Yeah.
really like the ugliest aspects of it. I'm sure that there's a lot of beauty to be found there if
Yeah.
you can kind of put blinders on.
Yeah.
But in a common refrain that I hear is like, oh well, it's so beautiful, you're partying in nature. And then I wanted to kind of make a joke of like how people talk about partying in nature, but then there's like all this single-use plastics going on there. You have DJs who participate in beach cleanups, but then they take private jets to their next gig.
Yeah.
What is like the tax like on that for the economy? Like,
Yeah.
so it's all very kind of hypocritical
Yeah.
in its sense. And those
Yeah.
are those are the easiest people to kind of make fun of
Yeah.
in a book like this. So
No kidding. Um, most of your stories, we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious to kind of get at the seed of where this came from. So most of your stories stay generally quite grounded. They definitely have moments of like heightened reality. And you even mentioned this earlier as we were talking about issues 3 and 4. There's a bit more absurdity to them. There's a bit more of almost a wink at the camera in different moments. And it's really cool to see, because you go from I've mentioned your range already, but you go from these really, really grounded, kind of vulnerable stories to these really absurd, big lampooning of different things. And it's pitch perfect all the way through in no matter which one you're doing. What led to this shift
well,
in
I thought that, coming from my background, which, people don't know me as a comic writer, I thought that it was very important for the first books to feel endemic to what people know me for from a subject matter standpoint.
Yeah.
But my interests as a writer really lie elsewhere. Like, I
Yeah.
love writing crime noir and grounded kind of fiction, but I would love to write fantasy. I would love to write sci-fi. I have, a couple of different projects in the works that are kind of more in that vein. And so this is kind of like that. These books are kind of like that transitionary period where it's like, okay, like it's what you know me for. But then since it is, since comics are like the only limitation to your creativity is a page count, why not push the envelope from a visual standpoint?
Yeah.
Why not delve into like the surrealist aspect of it? Really,
Yeah.
like what I want to touch in with all these stories, I just want to make people feel something.
Yeah.
So, much like a good night out, like at one of my clubs, especially
Yeah.
Outer Heaven, for example, like there's this heightened sensory experience in terms of the cocktails that you're tasting, the music that you're hearing, the feeling of being surrounded by strangers and the excitement that you derive from that.
Yeah.
Strangers who you can tell just by the fact that they're there, because the concept is very niche. Perhaps you have some mutual interest with them, which is very comforting in a city like New York, which feels so large.
Yeah.
And so that's really what I wanted to do with these books. Is I just wanted, to heighten your feeling as you're reading them. If it's arousal, if it's suspense, if it's violence. You know, just wanted to kind of, as the reader is reading, guide them through a heightened sensory experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's like I've mentioned before, it's cool to see that this if you'd continued as you were, it would have been brilliant. It would have still been fantastic. But it's really cool to see this trajectory of the series, which feels like it's evolving and constantly changing. So it's not one of those things where you read issues 1 and 2 and you go, oh, okay, so I don't need to read issue 3 and 4 because it's going to be more of the same. I feel like you've set up a story where it's like every issue could be totally different from the one before.
Yeah, and I have already an outline for issue 5, and you know, until the final page, it's something that is very plausible that could happen. And then, you know, once again, going back to Chekhov, I think that you know, the one continuity with all of his stories is that the last sentence is always like the one that makes you put the book down and be like that guy was, you know, hit.
Yeah.
And I think that you could say the same about the final panel, of any comic. Oftentimes, you know, from a formalist standpoint, especially when you're talking about a 20-page book, you know, the final page is on a page turn. And so it's very common, you know, and I think that this has been happening probably for the last probably 60 or 70 years. But like to put that final page as a splash page, you know, is like one of the most effective, I guess, structural tropes of the medium. But be it a splash page as the last page or the final panel that occurs on the page, like that's the, you know, you really need to, that needs to be the one that like send, like, you know, has people put the book down and be like, yes, like that.
Yeah.
I feel very fulfilled.
Yeah.
And so this one in particular, like I think like up until the final minute, like it's very plausible, and then the last page is just going to be something that once again delves into something that's a little bit fantastical. But I think that the payoff is earned. So
I can't wait to see it. So do you have any inspirations for this series that are outside of your hands-on experience? Like, are there any comics that are part of this series DNA?
Yeah, well, I think you know, the artists have been so distinct that, like, for example, The Life of the Party, which was the third story of issue 1, was the artist I found, like, you know, was very like a Bruce Timm, Darwin Cook style.
I was actually thinking Darwin Cook as I was reading it,
which I thought was very, that's Alfredo Torres. And I thought that was like a very interesting choice for the subject matter of that story, since like in a different artist's hands, the story would have felt a lot more morbid, but because it was a little bit cartoony and in that Somni Bruce Timm style, like it almost like softens the blow of, like, you know, that it's a very dark story about almost someone committing Jonestown in the club. That's what I was kind of joking about there. But
and it in another sense, I think it creates a tension that almost heightens that, because it's more of a, when you get to that last panel, like we were just talking about, it's such a shock. You're like, whoa, this is where this is going. This feels so cartoony and lighthearted. And then
there's certain art writers who to me are kind of like appointment reading now. Like, you know, I've read all of Darwin Cook's stuff. I love Ed Brubaker.
Don't get me started.
I recently I've really been loving the work of Denise Camp. I just picked up his most recent book yesterday, and it's an X-Men book. It's fantastic. I don't read a lot of Big Two stuff anymore, but I'll pick up anything of Denise. And And so yeah, so I mean, writers, yes, and then but more so it's really like my artist collaborators that I'd say I draw the most inspiration from is,
Hmm.
seeing their work and trying to play to their strengths.
Yeah.
There was a moment where Andre Guerin, who wrote
Hmm.
El Disco Erotique,
Hmm.
he's from Siberia,
Yeah.
and I wondered if he had ever been to a nightclub. So there was some kind of like granular explainy stuff that
Hmm.
went on in the back and forth process there. There was a lot of photographic reference of the Black Lodge that went in there for him to capture kind of like the feeling of it. Um,
And it was a really interesting art style that he took because it almost feels more painted.
yeah,
It was,
very abstract, and if you,
yeah.
his line work is ridiculous, and if you ever see his other stuff, he was paring it back for the story, but where his strength lies is like science fiction, and
Hmm.
it's remarkable. Uh, just like really elaborate line work that almost feels more like H.R. Giger than anything.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Strongly recommend checking out his stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's so interesting because his story is much more uh simplified and almost symbolic all the way through,
Mhm.
kind of paring down the details. So are
That
there are
was,
there
that was, Go ahead.
sorry, are there any comics that would you say are part of your DNA? So series DNA, but your DNA specifically that kind of made you fall in love with comics, that made you get into this craft. I know you
Well, I
mentioned
think,
Doctor Strange.
yeah, I think the Parker
Mhm.
books from
They're
Darwin Cook
fantastic.
are incredible. Recently, I've been reading a lot of like the early Hellboy stuff.
Oh,
It's
all
a
the
friend
good
of mine,
stuff.
Brian Level, was telling me about kind of like how Mike Mignola will work in like these additional panels that are kind
Mhm.
of like aspect to aspect moments, that kind of like really drive ambiance,
Mhm.
and they're almost like non sequiturs, like they
Yeah.
exist on their own plane on the page.
Yeah.
Whereas like I feel like Western comics like are so plot driven, and
Yeah.
sometimes like it's just like boom, 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 plot,
He
text,
almost
like
kind of like mirrors manga a little bit in that way. I know that
yes.
like Scott
Mhm.
McCloud talks about how you can build a scene from just telling the story, or you can build a scene from showing like 1,000 different perspectives, giving you a little piece of the scene altogether. And Mignola does a lot of that.
Yeah, recently I've been reading like a lot of Urasawa,
Mhm.
and I have actually a shelf in Inner Sanctum in my comic shop that's dedicated to Junji Ito.
Nice.
I've
Yeah.
been enjoying some of his works as well. I really love I really love Rick Remender. I think
Mhm.
is fantastic. Um, and yeah, I guess like I would say that those are kind of really my, and then Daniel Warren Johnson to me, like from
Yeah.
an artistic side, like I think that he's like kind of at the top of his game. And Abilene Kusenov,
Mhm.
who did Sunday Mofongo,
Yeah.
he and I are working on a long form project right now, and we're definitely we've been using Do a Power Bomb as like a big visual reference
I've
for
heard
that one.
amazing things about Duo Power Bomb. It's been on my reading list for forever. I don't know why I
Yeah.
haven't gotten to it yet. I need to.
And then also, I would say Greg Smallwood is a big
Oh,
inspiration of
Human
mine.
Target. My gosh.
Yeah, that was an incredible book, and I really I like a lot of Tom King's more kind of grounded stuff. I haven't read very much of his Bat stuff, but like a lot of his limited series is like
Mhm.
The Vision that he did with Gabriel Hernandez Walta, um, and just one more, Mr. Miracle. I thought was
Yeah,
fantastic as well. So.
yeah. If I can make a quick recommendation, his bad stuff is incredible. Like it depends who you talk to, what they think about it, but I think it's one of the most like the arc of it is like almost 100 issues long, and it
Wow.
feels like a single continuous arc. It's fantastically
Wow.
done. Yeah. So what are your plans for where this series is headed? You mentioned that you already have outlines for issue 5, or at least did you say you already have a script for issue 5?
Yeah, so I'm a very detailed outliner. So my outlines are almost like scripts, and then I format them in terms of pages and panel counts and tighten up the dialogue a little bit. So I do most of my scripting during the outline phase.
Mhm.
Um, but without revealing too much of the plot, I would say that this one, there's a very interesting plot device that kind of drives the story, and it's something that um, I think would actually be interesting to explore the possibility of working with different artists on it.
Okay, cool.
Where throughout the story, based on like as your perspective is shifting to different protagonists, like
Mhm.
maybe working with a different artist for each aspect of the story. And I think that that would benefit because this story is going to be a little bit longer. Like I could see it being maybe 50 or 60 pages, so kind
Yeah.
of like almost oversized comic, like an annual or
Okay.
something of that sort.
Okay.
So that's kind
That's
of
really cool.
what I've been marinating on right now.
Yeah.
But there's quite a few other more long form sequential projects that I've been working on, and one of them where I have like about 90 pages in the can right now. So that one in
That's
particular,
amazing.
with Abile and Hassan Otsman El How, Jason Wordy on colors,
Oh my
and
gosh, fantastic creative team you have there. That's gonna be so
and
cool.
and so yeah, so very excited. We'll see where
Do
that
you
one goes
do
in a
you
self-published
have you can lips can be sealed if you want to, but do you have any um estimated time of when you'll be announcing more about those projects?
Well, I think that one I'd like to. I'm on the precipice of completing the third issue, and then I'd like to start pitching it to publishers. But what I will say is that it's a sports comic, uh,
Okay, interesting.
which there's not that many Western sports comics on the
Yeah,
market, so it'll be very compelling.
that's really cool. Awesome. So I'm just gonna assume at this point it's a comic adaptation of Ted Lasso. That's what it is, essentially. Uh, you didn't say no. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I
Well,
just noticed that there's been this bevy of interest around sports media of sorts.
mhm.
There's an incredible documentary series called Untold on Netflix. There's an HBO Lakers series that's actually I believe that the main writer on that is Rodney Barnes, is it, who did Philadelphia? I
Okay,
hope.
yeah, Rodney Barnes did do
Yeah.
Philadelphia. That's
Mhm.
that's cool.
And
Wow.
he actually appears. He's a recurring character on the
Wow.
show as well.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
so
I had no idea about that. I have to check that show out.
there's a lot of like historical fiction stuff that's coming out that
Yeah,
it's a good time to be maybe coming to market with a sports book. We'll see.
yeah, that's really cool. Awesome. I can't wait to hear more about that and see what it's actually going to be. Um, so yeah, I think that's the end of our chat together. Thanks so much for chatting with me, Jack. I'm so excited to see where this series goes as well. Issue
Thank
5,
you.
cannot wait to read it. And I'm sure that you're going to get all kinds of accolades and stuff for issues 3 and 4.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Well,
The books,
just you know.
the physical copies came out incredible too.
Oh,
I got the book
cool.
thing here, but for me, one of my kind of mission statements, I guess you could say, with Prodigious Digits is that I want this company to always delve in the realm of physical assets.
Yeah.
So, you know, my career is predicated upon creating physical spaces where people come and enjoy.
Mhm.
And so despite the fact that there's been such a push towards digital,
Yeah.
to me the purest experience of reading a comic with your hands
Yeah.
is something that I don't think that
Matters.
can be captured
Yeah.
in the digital format. And so
And it's
that's
it's
what I guess.
one of those things that in some ways almost feels like it's a threat of being lost. So it's really cool that you guys are making a point of being a physical
The
retailer.
books are made in the United States. We have an amazing printing partner called Mulqueen Press, which is based in
Okay. Yeah.
California, and they just feel amazing in your hands.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again for chatting with me. Anybody who is watching this, if you want to go to Kickstarter, we're going to put the link in the description of the video and back this amazing project. And if you have the ability to do it, I say get yourself brutally murdered in a project coming up, because that's awesome. Have a great rest of your day, Jack, and thanks so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Zach.
No problem.